All right, welcome back to Resilient Voices and Beyond. This is your host, Michael D. Davis Thomas, aka MDDT Speaks. So excited to bring you guys another episode. And I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you guys for your support. Thank you guys for all that you guys do. Because without you guys, I wouldn't be able to do this. Truly, you guys have been inspiring and encouraging through and through. So I just wanted to say that, and I'm not gonna ramble on because you guys know I can talk. If this is your first time listening to this, first time hearing who I am or so forth. My name is Michael D. Davis Thomas. Spent a little bit of 11 years, a little bit over 11 years in the Michigan child welfare system. I've been advocating for a little bit over 10 years. I've done everything from minor social work to peer support to working in congregate care to running advisory boards, you name it, doing policy and programming and so forth. So I've done a lot in my short 25 years of life. Um, but I'm excited to have you here listening in. So I hope you tune into this episode and tune into others. Without further ado, I'm going to have my guests introduce themselves.
Hi, Michael. I just want to take this time and say thank you so much for having me on here. And I think it's awesome that you've created this space for people to learn from other people's stories. And my name is Jada Cuttriss, and I spent about 5 years in the foster care system, including aging out of care. Um, I should have been placed in foster care a long time ago, but sometimes you can fall between the cracks in the system. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I'm excited to have you on today. Truly, it's been a privilege. I believe we met in 2019, and it's been a friendship ever since. And so forth. I'm so excited to finally be able to have you on, and excited to see where this conversation goes. And I hope you guys that are listening are able to tune in and take some things from our story. With that being said, my first question, typically dives deep into when did your story begin and how did it begin?
Yeah, my story began, I would say growing up, the Department of Child Services was always in my life. You know, when you have the caseworker come out and talk to you and investigate and ask questions, but there was never enough for me to be able to get removed until I was at the age of 16. My dad started to spiral down and use drugs and alcohol, and he just wasn't able to be the parent that he could be. And my biological mother was never around, so it was just me and my dad. My siblings ended up moving out to like a spouse's home and then with their mother, but I was left there with my dad. And then it got to the point where he was drinking and driving all the time, wrecking with me in the car, trying to get me to take the blame. And it just got to the point where I started speaking up about it at school, and somebody cared and called it in. And the first time they would not remove me. The second time, I was staying with my sister at her boyfriend's family's house, and my dad tried to report me as a runaway. I was still going to school, doing everything that I was supposed to do. I just didn't want to go home. At that point in time, my father had a very abusive girlfriend, and they were very toxic. They would drink, they would take pills together, and it would make them very crazy and not their normal selves. And he ended up pushing her through like the glass window of the house, and she overdosed, and cops were there, and they were like glad I wasn't there. So they wouldn't take me as a runaway. So then the next day, I didn't go home. DCS came to school, which is the Department of Child Services. I know in other places it's called DCFS, maybe, I think. But everywhere I know it could be called different things. So they came to the school, talked to me. They didn't tell me where to go. So of course I'm going to go back to my sister's house because that's where I feel safe. And I went back to my sister's house, and then my dad showed up so drunk and tried to get me to go to the car with him, and I wouldn't. And then once that happened, DCS came out again, and the caseworker was like, we'll have a team meeting tomorrow. So that night, my father tried to commit suicide, and he overdosed, and they had to take him into a rehab that was court ordered for 72 hours. And that's how I got placed into the foster care system, because he wasn't able to make it to that meeting, to kind of see like, where would I go if I were to be in foster care.
Okay. Wow. That's a lot to endure in a lifetime, to say the least. I'm curious, when I go back to the beginning of your story, where there was, I forget what I call them DHS in my state. So social workers coming in and out, but there wasn't enough, there wasn't enough to make a removal, to say the least. And it's crazy enough that as a person that does peer support now, in my day-to-day, well, not my day-to-day, because it depends on the day, but in my work now with youth that are still in care, that's still a very big trend, at least in my state.
Absolutely.
Because I've had to make reports myself, and they're like, well, I get, because they send you a letter back, to you, to let you know if anything was found or what have you. And I get letters back saying, well, this is unsustainable. I'm like, well, at this point, this is discouraging, because I don't take it lightly as a person, lived experience, making a report, to CPS, to look into something. So when I do that, it's disheartening a little, so I just wanted to share that piece, because that it's still happening. I know I was a product of that, which is what led me into the juvenile system and then foster care system. But it's very intriguing. But my question about that specific piece is, how did you maintain self in the midst of that, throughout that back and forth, because I don't want to assume, but I can only speculate that not having that voice being heard weighed a lot on you. So what did that look like for yourself?
I think for me, it was a struggle, because like at first, like I would lie, like my dad would be like, say this or say that, don't say anything or you're going to get beat, or and then like, it was just, they're like, well, you have food, power, and water, and you have no evidence of these marks or bruises, or we can't prove this. And then I'm just like, then what's the point of talking to you? And I got to the point like where I didn't have that parental guidance at that young age. So, I was out drinking, I was out smoking, I was out doing things that a normal, 14, 15-year-old shouldn't have been doing, and had to grow up pretty fast. And not, having a dad that was like, oh, this is cool to do, like, let's do this. And, looking back now, it's like, wow, like, I can't believe like I was allowed to do those things. I did have struggled a lot, like with trusting people. Once I would tell CPS about like what was going on, or even telling people what was going on at home, because I'm like, well, nobody's going to believe me, like nothing's going to happen. So for me, I think it was hard. And looking back now, I believe that I really struggled with depression back then and suicidal ideations back then with that stuff.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And I ask that because, too many times when we go through things in life and so forth, we don't really know what other people are thinking, how other people take certain things and so forth. So I was really interested and intrigued for, anyone that may be going through something similar like this. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a particular youth. It could be just in
Mhm.
relationship with people where you feel like you can't
Yeah.
share that something is going wrong or what have you. You
Mhm.
know, I just, think that's a really important piece to be able to highlight what you went through and how you maintained self, and um that it did, have some side effects in a way. Think back to my time in care and talking to teachers, you
Mhm.
know, and teachers, kind of shrugging it off, because I was in a very urban environment, low budget, so had 100 other kids to worry about. So, and half of the kids have home issues themselves, you know. So, teachers never really took me serious, and then when I started to display behavior issues, in school and in the community, I was scapegoated by my family, labeled as having anger management problems and all this other stuff. But at that point, it was just too far deep. You ain't listening, and I ain't got time to let this keep happening, and I was just so angry. So, fortunately, my path led me to the juvenile side for a little bit, in corrections. But ultimately, I ended up finding my way to foster care because I went back home and nothing changed, you know?
And it's crazy how when stuff's happening bad at home, how it does lead to behavior problems. Like for myself, I grew up in a rural area, so not in an urban area. So my graduating class was 22. So everybody knew your business, right? Um, and I was labeled as that troublemaker, that girl like you don't want your kids hanging out with, out of control, skipping school. And then like to look back now and like I'm one of the few that have made it pretty far in
Mhm.
my goals and dreams. So for me, it's kind of a good thing. Like, wow, like I did make it through.
Definitely, definitely. I can attest to that as well.
Mhm.
I when I go spin a little bit forward,
Okay.
you have the meeting,
Mhm.
you get removed, paperwork and all that stuff is getting done. Where's the first place that you go? And it's at the last place that you go.
Yeah, so this is very interesting. So for me, I mentioned I grew up in a very small town, right? So
Mhm.
it was all Caucasian people. So my foster mom was African American, and you had all these stereotypes from my hometown of like, oh, the city's so bad and this and that. And then I went to a group home, and there was three other kids there. It was all girls, and there was cops there when I first got to the home. And
Mhm.
one of the other youth had some behavioral issues and some mental health issues and tried to attack foster mom. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like I do not belong here. Like I'm freaking out. Like this is crazy. And that foster mom really took the time to get to know me and tell me, like, hey, you can get through this. Like, even though you've had like a bad experience, you can still persevere and make it through. And with her getting to um, actually taking the time to get to know me and talk to me and listen to me, it made me feel a lot more comfortable being in her home. And um, during that time period, my caseworker at the time would drive me back and forth to my school because I learned there's this thing called the Foster Youth Bill of Rights, and you can advocate for yourself to stay at the same school. So I did that. And that's when I first started to learn that I could use my voice. After that, I'm very lucky because I know a lot of folks that have been in the system had to move around a lot. I actually had someone become a foster parent for me at school. Um, and I stayed with her all the way until I graduated college. I mean, high school, not college, graduated high school. And then I went off to a program here in Indiana. It's called a summer bridge program. And it's with Foster Success, which is a nonprofit here in Indiana. And it helped prep you for college. And the neat thing about it, it was all former foster youth. And I've never felt like I belonged somewhere until I was there, because I realized I wasn't alone and learning everybody else's stories. And that's what made me gain the courage to want to be a voice for others, because so many people told me their stories. I'm like, wow, like I thought my story is pretty bad, but like someone over here's went through something so much more worse. And I'm like, nobody's advocated for you or showed you these different resources. And that's what really lit a fire underneath me to want to help. Then I went off to college, and I wasn't able to stay in a dorm right away because it wasn't a ECS placement. So I had to get a court ordered to go to college because I started college at 17. And a lot of folks, I could see them not doing that because they didn't know. They'd be like, okay, then I'm not going to go. So that's like a barrier I see happening often with dorms not being a DCS placement. Once I went to college, I got into a very abusive relationship. And then I think you've had Josh come on here and speak before, Joshua Christian. Mm-hmm. So his parents actually let me come stay at their house when I left that abusive relationship. And they became like a host home for me. So then that was my last placement that I had in care after I aged out.
Wow. Talk about transition. You know, I just want to go back because in my mind, you mentioned the your first placement was at this group home with an African American woman, and when you show up as cops there, I only imagine in my mindset, I'm like, I know y'all didn't bring me to this ghetto place. Like that's where I would have went in my mind. I'm like, I know y'all lying. Y'all, first of all, the police is already here, so why are we stopping? Like, keep going. Yeah. So I can only imagine, you know, the thought process after whatever, you know, you're not going back home. That's already been established. And you have to go somewhere new, you know, not really knowing what that place going to be. And then you show up at a place where law enforcement is involved, you know, and yeah, I can understand how that can, like, okay, now anxiety, all this other stuff, you know. So how did you, because I know sometimes as you know, foster youth and alumni, you know, we don't let too many people in. So how did you, from that visual, open up to that woman to be able to receive whatever help you needed in that moment and build a relationship?
Yeah. After the cops left, she explained to me what was going on. I'm not going to go into all detail because that's that foster youth's personal business. But the youth was removed from the home into a new placement. And we just talked for hours. And like, I felt like someone actually listened and cared about me and took the time, because she could have been like, oh, I'm going to bed. But instead, like, we stayed up for like 4 hours, and I got there pretty late. So it was probably like 3 o'clock in the morning before we went to bed. And she just listened to me, and she just like said that, you know, she talked positive to me and told me like she could see this glow in me and that I was going to make it far, and that just because you went through this situation and got removed doesn't mean you can't make a difference or make a change. And it just really sparked a feel under me to be like, wow, like someone actually that doesn't even know me took the time to actually get to know me and talk to me about like what's all happened.
Definitely. So, you know, was there like a structure in her home, you know, or like what was the structure? I guess I'm asking, what was like the structure like? Because I know that you mentioned, you know, you were pretty much out there on your own, you know, got into things and so forth. So to go to somewhere that, you know, I know they had rules and requirements under DCF or I don't, it's really tripping my brain to call it something else. Under, the child services in your state, so to go somewhere where there is structure, there is set kind of parenting, or guidance when you were out there, just doing how
Yeah.
did that translate, into that home?
So in the group home, I think it was pretty easy. I wasn't like going out and doing all those things like I used to prior living with dad, but I was gained like a house key right away. She gave me my own bedroom. Um, trust really fast. The only really weird thing is that the food would be locked up at night.
Mm.
So that was kind of different. And I mean, you just had to be honest with her and ask permission for stuff. Like, hey, can a friend come over? Hey, can we walk to the mall? Or can we do this? But the second placement, so the person that became a foster parent for me, was very hard. She was a little bit older, and grew up a totally different life than I have had. And she wanted me to be a kid. And I did not know how to be a kid because I had to grow up so fast. I did not know how to like just relax and try to be a kid. And we butted heads a lot. But looking back, I'm very glad we did because she helped me become the woman that I am today.
That's amazing. I asked that question because it can be extremely hard, especially if you've been parentified, having siblings that you had to take care of, or if you just had to adult at a very young age, or if you had to be the parent to your own parents,
Yeah.
so having to set out of that mindset or out of that reality that has been your world can be it can almost be like crazy and untangible, because your whole mental state has been built, and your brain growth and development has been built up until that moment, to be able to survive that, not to be able to live through this, So I asked that to kind of get your take on what did that it look like. So you mentioned, moments of realization that there's this whole population out here of people who have stepped into, their own voice. And that kind of took you out there to start, you utilizing your voice and so forth. So I want to step into more so your advocacy, because I know you've done a lot of advocacy. When did that begin, and what was your first encounter with that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Michael. I want to say back in 2014, no, 2015, because that's when I was removed. 2015, I had a independent living worker, which we call them IL workers here. So if I say IL worker, that means an independent living worker. I had an IL worker. She was phenomenal. She became a big mentor to me. She took me to college tours. She took me for scholarship interviews and programs, and so many college applications she helped me with. She said, hey, there's this thing with, at the time it was called Connected by 25, but now they're called Foster Success. And it was one of their quarterly meetings that they had for Central Indiana. And you came there and just kind of talked about like, what problems or what things have you seen in the system that need to be changed? And it kind of placed a vent. It was a safe place. And I just went there and I was just like, wow, like this is like I felt that fire inside me. And I was like, yeah, this is where I need to be. So after that meeting, I talked to the person that led it and I was like, hey, like, how can I get more involved? So once I went to college, I started advocating more and more. And then, especially being downtown Indianapolis, it was a perfect way to get in touch with other folks that have had similar experiences like us. I became a mentor for incoming foster youth at college through a program called NINA Scholars and Thrive. And it was just amazing to learn like all these people's different stories and like how they got to where they are today. And I thrive off of giving people resources that maybe they didn't know about to help them. With Foster Success, I helped do the foster parent. Well, we were appointed by Foster Success, but with Director Terry Stigdon, who leads the Department of Child Services, I was selected to help recreate and review the Foster Parent Bill of Rights in 2018. I was on the leadership board for the Indiana Youth Advisory Board, and would speak with the deputies of the Department of Child Services and bring like the issues from those quarterly meetings I was talking about. And we would come together on our leadership team and bring it to the deputies of the Department of Child Services and say, hey, like, here's what we've been hearing that folks are struggling with. How can we change this? And then we would have some ideas of how we can change it, and we would work together. That's where my advocacy really first started. And then it just kept growing from there. There was just different opportunities that people would share with me, be like, hey, I think this would be good for you, or I think you'll be interested in this. Like I tell people, it's not really what you know, it's who you know. To really get into those doors of advocacy or anything else. I know in 2019, I think Joshua Christian and I helped push extending foster care in Indiana to age 23 from 21. So when you age out, we have done some work, went to a lot of conferences, Foster Youth in Action. I don't know if they're still around anymore, but we went to a couple of those conferences in Washington, D.C. and California. And that was always cool traveling because as a foster youth, I've never really been out of state until then. So it was neat to meet folks. And then I did the NIDED review, and that's where I met you, Michael. And that was really neat to meet a bunch of other folks that are like in a professional area in their life that come from similar backgrounds as you, because you hear that stigma all the time, like, oh, you were in foster care, you're a trouble kid, you're a bad kid, like it's your fault, like you're not going to make it. But then seeing actual people make it, it's like we can make it.
Definitely. Wow. You've done a lot, and as another alumni, I just want to, thank you for the work that you have done, give you your flowers, and some, because it's needed. And advocacy can be a sacrifice. And some people may be wondering, and you may be wondering what I mean by that. Sometimes, as we're transitioning and as we're growing, because there's no guide to adulting, there's no guide to how to transition, there's no guide to, healing or anything, I know as advocates, sometimes we get into advocacy and then we realize things that are going on in personal and so forth. And we're advocating as while we're healing, and so forth, and that can be a journey in itself, so there's a sacrifice there in helping other people and then having to take time to help yourself, which it's not for not always, because I know some people out there is like, no, I did my healing, got myself together before I started doing this, if that's what you did, by all means, I commend you, but sometimes, a lot of us as alumni, we get asked to do things straight out the gate. Like we aged out, oh, you want to go do this? And so we're like, yeah, I want to give back, but we don't realize that we still got process. We got some things to process, and we start processing as we're doing things and so forth. And that doesn't take away from the words that we're putting out to help other people, but also it only challenges us even more to be able to eat those words ourselves and be able to manage. So my question following that is, how has that journey of processing everything you went through in childhood, you know, transitioning, from high school to college, to relationships that did not work, work out, because that's a whole topic in itself, dealing and building relationships to, your expertise and getting things done and being quote unquote stable adult, so how did that work out, for yourself? What did you do? How did you manage? How did you maintain? And what was self-care? What was mental health like throughout that? And I know that's a very loaded question, so feel free to break that apart.
All right. So that is a wonderful question. And I'm so glad we're talking about it because I do not think mental health is talked about enough, especially for folks that have been through a lot of trauma like we have. And sometimes you maybe not even realize the type of trauma that you've been into until you encounter advocating with someone. And then you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm triggered, that hit me, like I can relate to that. And then you have to go unpack that on your own time. So starting from the beginning, when I was placed in foster care, I was court ordered to go to therapy. And I was like, oh, this is easy. I'm just going to tell them what they want to hear. And that's what I did. As I got older, I would be in relationships that I saw my dad in. So very abusive, violent, yelling, not healthy at all. I never really saw a healthy relationship until I lived with Josh's parents, actually. And so I started going to therapy on my own in 2019. So my cat is over here just saying hello. So in 2019, I went to a therapist, and for me, I have a bias, so I work with a male therapist because I feel like I can talk to males better. I don't know why. Maybe it's because my mom wasn't around. I don't know, but I just feel more comfortable talking with a male. And it's kind of nice to get their perspective from things too, not being a female. So I started working on myself in 2019, and one of my best friends encouraged me to go. And it's really good to have those people around you that hold you accountable for yourself. So I started going to therapy, and I started really unpacking things that I've never talked to anyone before about, that I never thought were a big deal. But when I talked about it with my therapist, they were like, holy cow, like you went through that, like let's unpack that. And like, what did I need for younger Jada? And it was a very good experience for me. It was hard. Working on yourself is hard. But in the end, it helps you be able to control your emotions, to unpack what you've been through and not hold it in. Because I felt like that's something I struggled with, was always holding it in. Like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm fine. Or I'm just going to work a lot so I don't think about it, or build all my time so I have no time to think about anything. So once I started working on myself, I became more aware of what would trigger me. Once I graduated college in the pandemic, I quit going to therapy. So during the pandemic, I probably could have used some therapy because, I mean, it was a big, crazy thing for everyone, I think, going through the pandemic. So I just started going back to therapy, I would say, in March of this year. And I love it. So with my job, I work with the Department of Child Services now. So I'm like on the other side. So I'm an assessment worker, and I see stuff at work all the time that is triggering, and that's hard. And I would always want to come home and unpack it with my partner. And he didn't understand, what I'm talking about or how. So it was good for me to be able to unpack that with a therapist and work on different techniques. Like right now, I'm working on my resentments, because those resentments that you have in life can hold you down and drag you down. So I'm learning on how to let go of those, which can be hard, but it's something that I'm working on. And to go back a little bit, when I was younger, before I got put in care, I would write poetry, and music was my escape.
Okay, that's you dropping bars. I love that. I love that. And to just hear your transition throughout your journey, dealing with mental health, and dealing with therapy, and understanding what works for you,
Mhm.
because I completely get that. And I don't know what that is. I will be interested in doing a whole study and research, because for me, I had a lot of issues with my mom and so forth, but I prefer, like, when I was in residential, or in therapy, so forth, to talk to females. I also have a lot of female friends, you know.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, if anyone wants to be my male friend, because I need some people when I finally get married. I don't want to get a whole bunch of renter homies, so need some male friends in my life. So if anyone is in the state of Michigan, want to go out sometime, let me know. But that's my um no, but for real, like, that's a real thing, as I
Yeah.
talk to other alumni, like, some of them, like, hey, because of this happened, or just this specific instance, I prefer this over
Yeah.
that, and that's crazy, because working in the professional realm of things, some certain things, and I think about peer support. Best practice is you work with your sex, but I have specific clients. I work with both sexes,
Mhm.
because specific clients prefer to talk with me,
Yeah.
um, and what have you. And I was like, well, this what best practice is this, and like, I don't care about none of that. Like, you are who I connect with and who I would like, really. And that's just something interesting to think about, as some of the listeners here, maybe foster parents, maybe social workers and so forth, and you're trying to wonder why or what have you. Hopefully this gives you some kind of insight. What I want to, navigate to, if you don't mind, me asking you about this specific piece, is relationship, because you spoke about how that was a cycle in
Yes.
itself. Um, how did you break away from that, or take the steps towards, understanding what you needed and what you deserve? Because I know a lot of, not, and I don't want to be specific towards young ladies, I know a lot of us as alumni, relationships is a stumbling block, you know um whether you go through the whole, yeah, this my friend, that's my friend, and knowing that none of these people treat you the same way that you treat them, or this is my man, or this is my woman, and you getting cheated on, and you just looking past it, or getting hands placed on you, or you're placing and it's just this very
Mhm.
toxic mess and so forth. So there's so many different variations, but you talked about at a, even dating when you were young, and so forth, it was these patterns. So, from your story and from your perspective, how did you break away from those patterns to, you know, um, find healthier relationships?
So first, I'm going to start with friends. So friends or people in general. I would just say friends and people in general. I'm a giver. I will give, 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 give until I don't have anything to give anymore. Um, I've been better at not just pouring from an empty cup, because that's what I would do. Because you cannot pour from an empty cup if you can't help yourself. So I've learned that over the years. If you're going to give, people are going to take. And that's just how it is.
Mhm.
Um, I've learned having boundaries is a huge thing when it comes to people in general and friends. And voicing like what you need in a friendship. Um, so going back to significant relationships or romantic relationships, let's just say that romantic relationships. I would date people that were like my dad. because that's all I knew. That was the male figure that I looked up to, essentially. Even though like I was removed from him, I still loved my dad. I mean, that's my dad. I have a lot of resentments, but at the end of the day, he was still my dad. So my first relationship out of high school and in college, my freshman year, was very toxic. I think I struggled with abandonment because I was always worried everyone's going to leave. So I'm going to do everything I can in my power to not let this person leave. So I would just get cheated on. Okay, cool. Talk to other girls inappropriately. Okay, cool. Be talked down to. And I just was like, okay, spend all my money on this person. And then my best friend, Joshua Christian, was like, hey, this is not healthy. And I don't like seeing you sad. So the biggest reason and the way I was able to get out of that is my independent living worker. I finally broke down to her and told her what was going on. And then Josh's parents said, hey, you can come stay here if you need to. Because there's a point that I was staying in my car and they were like, hey, you can come stay here until you get back up on your feet. And I was like, awesome. Thank you so much. And I never knew what I needed until I found out what I needed. So watching Josh's parents, I mean, yeah, you're going to have arguments, but it's healthy to have arguments and disagreements to communicate, but it's not healthy for someone to talk down on you and call you a bunch of names I'm not going to say, but inappropriate names, and yell at you and hit you or punch walls next to your head. Like, that's not normal. And to me, that was my normal because that's how I grew up. And I had to learn what my new normal was. So once I lived with them, I started to have different standards in a relationship. And then the first guy that I've dated since then, I'm still with him. And we did take a break for a while to work on ourselves. And we both needed to grow up. But it's very important to voice what you need in a relationship. So my therapist and I have worked on, it's the love languages. People might think it's silly and crazy, but there's certain things that you need. So like for love languages, there's like, I think it's acts of service, physical touch, words of affirmation.
Quality time.
Yep, quality time. And my therapist and I talked because my partner and I at this time have different ideas of what quality time is. We live together. So he thinks if we're just here at home, that's quality time. To me, it's not. To me, I like to maybe like us playing a video game together or, certain things like that. So really voicing like what you need for those certain love languages. And if anyone's listening and they have a partner, definitely take the love language test. It's online, it's free. It'll help you tremendously learn what you and your partner both need, because your love languages can be totally opposite, like me and my partners. So I really think learning in therapy what I needed to work on for myself, because I'm not perfect. I had a lot of toxic traits myself. I would yell, I would scream, I would throw things. But then I learned like that's not normal. And I was like, wow, like I have a lot to work on. So I didn't date anyone for like a year and a half and worked on myself.
Wow. I appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability with that, because I truly believe you probably already know. I believe open conversation from people who have lived through it is the only way that we're able to set that standard for the next generation of alumni coming up, to know that it's okay to talk about these things. It's okay to not have it all figured out. And I believe it's up to us as alumni who have went through it to be open, if we're comfortable, about like, hey, I dealt with this relationships. I dealt with, going through that and what have you, and sharing, proper ways to navigate through that. I'm a person, I'm in the aspect of dating, which is a journey in itself.
Yeah.
But throughout the journey of dating with myself, I use, I ask questions about attachment styles, because it's important, as I've done things with my therapist to figure out what my attachment style is,
Mhm.
and understanding what my love languages is and what I require and what I need. We all across the board need communication. Communication, it's a stabling block, on that foundation, but also having clear cut understandings of values, morals, and beliefs, help, as well. And there's many other things that you can add to, continue to build that foundation, but I think those few things are the beams, that holds everything together. So for me, as a more I used to be, you know um as far as my attachment styles, I forget what all of them are called, but I have some fearful avoidance, anxiety. Now, as I've retaken things and really, been working, on my mental health and my spiritual health and so forth, and my walk through life, I'm in a more so secure place. But that doesn't make it better, because, completely, to say it's positive, but now I'm in a secure place when people aren't where I'm at. you know it can be hard, and arguments can arise and so forth. So anybody else that's out there where I am, just know that the work still continues, and it's good to know where you stand, so you're not projecting onto other people, and you can notice if other people are projecting onto you, so they can continue their own individualized healing. And if it is a relationship that is being sought after, that individual healing comes first, and then you guys come together and prioritize what works with each other, because unfortunately, we live in a society, where sometimes life, brings people together, and it's easier to be together, affordable to be together and so forth, and go through a journey, and so forth, and figure things out as you go. But I implore people to, bite against the grain and make sure that even if that is what you guys take on, to just, push through without really truly knowing the holistic aspect of whichever partner, relationship, friendship, or what have you, that you still prioritize your individual recovery, and because your recovery comes first, and it can only worsen if you don't deal with it. So that's my, little spiel I wanted to share. I wanted to, be mindful of your time. I only have a couple more questions.
Okay,
You
you're
know,
fine. We're
so
good.
you talked about working and social work now.
Mhm.
What has that journey been like? Coming from lived experience to you putting on a more professional hat, and seeing things on the other side.
Mhm. I think that is a really good question because a lot of people ask me, oh my gosh, you were in foster care. How are you working with the Department of Child Services? And for me, you have to, my mindset is you have to see all three sides of the system, right? So you need to see the foster parent side. I've worked with a foster parent agency. You need to see the youth side. I have my own personal youth experience. And you need the case manager side because there's three sides in the child welfare system. And there's policies, of course, too, that are on top of all that stuff. So working as a family case manager, so I work in assessment. So I'm the person that gets the calls from the hotline. Hey, there's been this abuse or neglect. You need to go out on this. So that's my job. I like doing that because I like talking to the kiddos and getting to know like what's going on at home, because sometimes it's a simple conversation that we need to have with the family. But sometimes it's hard because you get that gut feeling like we know something's going on at home, but the kiddo will not disclose, or we don't have enough evidence to do anything. But the one thing about that is that that family is probably going to come back around and we're going to get them again. It doesn't mean that the kid's trauma, we can help it at all, but that family usually comes back around and then that child usually gets removed. I've seen that happen a lot. So far in my experience, I've been with the department for about a year. I think the hardest thing for me is when parents don't believe the children. Like if a mom's boyfriend did something to the child or vice versa, and they don't believe the child, I think that's hard for me because I have to maintain my professionalism and keep myself together. But I do vent with my coworkers and my therapist about like, what could I have done better, or how do I cope with this? And especially like when I get triggered, I've had to do a couple removals myself, and those are hard. I've cried. There's one, I removed 4 kiddos and I cried with the kids. But I learned being transparent with those kids was the best thing that ever happened. Letting them know, hey, this is what's going on. And letting them know, like, I will do my best to keep you together. Because 4 siblings, that's a lot. And it's hard to keep kiddos together when you remove. But I was able to keep them all 4 together. And I told them, I said, if I'm not able to keep you all together, I'll try to do 2 and 2. And they're like, okay, they were, understanding. And I think that removal was the hardest one I've ever done. I actually left the department. I came back because I needed to take some time and work on myself. So I started going to therapy a little bit more. But I think being a social worker, the biggest thing, and having your own personal experience, I mean, everyone has some type of trauma, right? But having your own personal experience in the child welfare system, self-care is the biggest thing you have to have. I also had somebody in my office, he retired, he's worked for the state for like 42 years. And he told me, write down those good days. Write down when that kid gives you a hug and says, thank you for listening to me. Write down when that kid makes you a picture and colors you a picture. Because when you have those bad days, you want to look back at those good days. Because sometimes those good days are going to help overcome those bad days. I still think it's a journey for me. I try not to share my experience with my clients unless I feel like it's needed. Like if it's an older foster youth that gets placed into the system, I might share a little bit. I won't go into deep detail, but I'll share a little bit. And I feel like it helps them learn that they're not alone. And I always give them resources too. So, yeah.
Awesome. I'm glad you touched on self-care because I was going to ask, what is your routine, to debrief yourself, because I do a lot of panels and a lot of trainings with incoming social workers in my state, whether they're private agency or with the state, and in those trainings that I do in panels, I ask them, to get yourself a self-care routine, and break it down, because sometimes we think self-care is just going to get our nails done, but in this occupation of child welfare, in this field, in other fields, that's not enough, because coping skills sometimes can age out, and the more minimal the coping skill, the less time you have with that coping skill, and I've learned that over time in life. So I challenge them to build, self-care routine with self, and then with a friend or a partner, goldfish, dog, whoever else is in the household, or whoever else is in your circle. Because when you have those really tough days, when a kid has passed away due to abuse or neglect, and you had been a part of that case, when as an extremely horrendous case,
Mhm.
against a infant, and so forth, and to just say a few, I know there's other examples, but to
Mhm.
say a few about those really crazy days, and it doesn't even always have to be about the Pacific case. It can be just about the caseloads, the
Mhm.
stress,
Mhm.
the anxiety that this is a person's life in your hands, and what choice do you have on certain what we think are small decisions, but are really impactful decisions that you have to make as a social worker, or so forth. So I challenge them to really have those impactful self-care routines that help them debrief. And I tell them one thing, and I'm interested to get your take on this. Make sure, if possible, you have a safe place. And if all your work is outside of your whole household, you don't have to work in your household. I know through COVID, a lot of people are doing in home stuff, so that can be different. Now we're going back to the offices and so forth. So if all your work is outside of the household, your house is your safe space. So by the time you get to your door and unlock that door, you should have let go of that day, you
Mhm.
know, and released it from yourself. You still gonna have some thoughts tingling in there. But when you walk into your household, don't carry the guilt, don't carry all that other stuff, because you can't afford, and we can't afford, because it's social workers, are few and far between nowadays, for you to tap out, and everything. But this helps you have that longevity, and not saying that makes you numb, that makes you a person that doesn't care, but you have to be able to let go. Think about my work not only in child welfare but also being a first responder. If I carried every death that I've came on scene to with me, I would have not been able to be able to just hop in when I see someone hurt, or be able to do triage. Like, it will have me stagnant, pause, so I just created a system to really help me function. And these are just some things, like, you can create it however way you want to do it, but I just think that is really helpful for you to be able to debrief, and really to, have a safe place where you don't carry any of what you do into. Like, it's not that it's a separate world, but it's a place that you can relax, you know. But I don't know. That's my thought process on it. I have a few, well, more so two statements, more so from you, but they're questions,
Okay.
whichever. I just want to thank you for your time and really having this in-depth conversation with me. Um, you've done so much work. I tell people all the time. More recently, I've talked to some other people I've had on here, and got to share with them. But there's a couple, alumni that I observe, in order to grow myself, and I don't observe everybody, just like, I'm a person. I don't know if anybody out there is the same as me. I don't let everybody pray for me, you know, I don't know where your prayer coming from, no offense, I'm just a person that's like, there's very few people that I know that are out here doing what they need to do for the real reasons and unapologetically being themselves. You're one of those people that I observe to learn to be better, in my walk in doing this work, So I appreciate you being on here and sharing how you've navigated life, and how you are continuing to work on that aspect of thriving and being in a healthy and healed place. So thank you for that. What
Thank you.
advice No problem, no problem. What advice would you like to leave here today? Could be categorically, or, whichever, or it could be more general.
So I have two things. Becoming a parent, being in the foster care system can be hard. I'm due in March. It brings up a lot of trauma. So that self-care that we've talked about today throughout this whole podcast is super, super important. And having those boundaries with people, learning it's okay to say no. And don't give up on your dreams just because someone might say, oh, you can't do it. I don't know how many people have told me, oh, you're not going to go anywhere. You're just white trash or this and that, you know, growing up. And now I look back and I would have never thought I would have graduated high school, but I graduated college. I'm getting my master's degree. Like, I'm starting a family. I bought a house. I have my own car, and I'm only 23. So people can do it. And you don't have to have a certain timeline to do things. Just because you see another person out here, you know, getting married at 22 doesn't mean you have to get married at 22. Doesn't mean you have to buy a house at 21. Just as long as you're happy with your life at the end of the day, that's what matters. Yeah.
I was over here waiting for more. I'm like, okay, I was intrigued,
You
but
want
I
more?
couldn't have said it better.
Well, I guess another thing too is on my, you know, you asked for a quote, right? So I had hope anchors the soul, Hebrews 6:19. So I have it tattooed on my spine because hope keeps you standing tall. Your spine keeps you standing tall. So throughout my whole journey, hope has been the way that I've been able to get through everything. So that's my biggest thing, is having hope. As long as you don't lose hope, you're going to make it and it's going to be okay.
Definitely. I appreciate that. And also congratulations, you know.
Thank you.
Any last comments? And this is like, if you got a rap song coming out, I know you got the bars, you know, like you mentioned earlier. So if you got an album out there, you know, on SoundCloud or something, you know, this is where you could drop that. But more importantly, how people can stay connected to you or follow
Yeah.
you, or
Um,
if that is something that you're open or
yeah.
wanting to share.
So I can share, I would like, if there's any alumni out there, or foster youth currently aging out of care, you know, if you have questions or need resources, you can get a hold of me. I'll give you my email. So it's going to be CUTTRISSJADA@gmail.com. So that's a way, if you need something, you can email me, or you can follow me on Instagram. It's just Jada_Montana with 2 N's. And like I said, I love to help people. I thrive off finding resources for people. And you don't even have to be in foster care or even have that kind of experience. I help a lot of individuals in many different ways. So please feel free to contact me that way as well, and continue to listen to MDDT Speaks. I'm really excited to go back and listen to some more of other folks that have came on here and talked, to see if I can learn or grow from them.
Definitely. I feel led to give a trade secret of mine and an aspect of self-care, you know, and don't laugh at me, y'all. Please don't laugh at me, but morning and night, I listen to the author's theme song of the TV show. I don't know if any of you guys really sit and listen to that song, but it's very powerful, very positive, it's very uplifting. And for me, I listen to the words and I let the words encourage me, you know, from the beginning of my day into the end of my day. I'm a big person that I want to step into purpose when I wake up and when I close my day out. You know, I want to know that I've done something when I close my day out, you know, that it's meaningful. And I want to know that I'm going to do something purposeful and meaningful when I start my day, you know. So if I can, you know, encourage any of you guys, you know, if you're into music, which most people are, if you're into a book, into a mantra, or something like that. Set it in stone in your self-care plan to, listen to it, read it, say it, look at it at the beginning of your day and at the end of the day. Do it for 30 days. See if it's something that you like or something that makes a transformative difference in your life. Get back to me. Everybody got my email. I'm interested to see what that looks like. It's something that has helped me for years. Um, Something that I continue to do. I'm very strict with my self-care plan. I don't really negate, from it. Um, but that's something that I do. But I want to again thank you, Jada, for being on here. Congratulations, on becoming a mom. I definitely would love to have you back on here in like a year,
Yeah.
to talk about, that navigation of parenthood,
Mhm.
being a person with lived experience, being a person that's with lived experience working in the social work field,
Yeah.
because I think both of those two things can, have a big impact on how you parent, and what parenting looks like. So we'd love to have you back on. I know I've been talking to a couple other people who are parents or who are becoming parents about, doing some roundtable talks, centered around this, because I believe that's another topic of discussion that people can use some resources, some guidance, and some just authentic know-how about. So anything else you would like to say last?
I think one thing you really kind of pulled me to talk about one thing I do for self-care. And I talk to myself. So I do self-positive affirmations in the morning and at night. So kind of like how you listen to the Arthur theme song. I, you know, talk about 3 things that I've done today that are good. So even if it's like I ate good today for my baby, or you're gonna in the morning, you're gonna get through this today. Like, it might be a crappy day, but you're gonna get through this. So that's something that I do that kind of pulled my interest of when you were talking about that. But I would definitely love to come back on here in about a year or so to kind of talk about how I've navigated parenthood as being, my biological family is not around. So I really think that may be able to help others too that could be going through that same experience.
Definitely. Well, thank you once again. Um, I get ready to, end out episode 17 of season 2. Um, just wanted to say we may have talked about some things here that could be potentially triggering. I am completely mindful of those things. So I wanted to say if you've made it to the end of this episode, please, as you end out this episode, take some time before you just go about anything else to center yourself. Do some mindfulness exercise, bring yourself back to baseline. But also think about what triggers you. If it's something new that just came up, think about it, and write it down. And maybe something there that you might want to confer in a professional about or so forth, but make sure that you're taking care of yourself. You are taking care of your mental health, you know, um, and physical health. Um, COVID, COVID is out there still, cold and flu season. So, definitely please make sure that you're taking care of yourself. No, we still live in this day and age where people are against masks and all this other stuff. Everybody has their own right to live however way they want to live, but just know that we a village. When you see someone in crisis, I feel we all have a duty to help that person. Because if the roles were reversed, no one wants to be that person calling out for help, and no one comes to help them. So let's just think about that as holiday seasons are coming up. Mental health is up and down. People are dealing with situational depression, and being aware that not too long ago a whole bunch of people lost their life around this season. you know due to COVID and different things like that. So check in with people that you may know, have lost someone, during COVID, who have lived experience, and holidays are a little bit tough on them, and just be mindful within self and within others. But this has been Resilient Voices and Beyond, episode 17 of season 2. You guys have a good night, good morning, good whenever you're listening to this. And I hope to see you guys again.